The wheel splintered with a crack like a gunshot, and Katherine Keller knew she was going to die, out here in the white hell that had swallowed the world whole. She'd been driving her wagon northwest from Richmond for 3 days when the storm descended from the mountains like God's own wrath, turning the afternoon into a howling nightmare of ice and wind. The year was 1883, and she'd thought herself prepared for anything the journey might bring, but nothing could have prepared her for this. The blizzard had come on so suddenly that she'd barely had time to wrap her cloak tighter before the world disappeared behind a wall of white. Now, with her right rear wheel shattered and the wagon listing dangerously to one side, she sat frozen in the driver's seat, her fingers too numb to even hold the reins properly. The wind shrieked around her like a living thing, tearing at her hood and driving needles of ice into any exposed skin. Her horse, a sturdy mare named Daisy, whinnied in distress, her breath coming in great plumes of steam that were instantly torn away by the gale. Katherine tried to think, tried to form a plan, but her mind felt as frozen as her fingers. She was 22 years old, and she was going to freeze to death on a road somewhere in the Virginia highlands because she'd been foolish enough to think she could outrun a storm. She couldn't even see 10 feet in front of her. The world had become nothing but white and wind and cold that cut through her wool cloak like it was made of paper. Her teeth chattered so hard she bit her tongue, tasting blood. She needed to do something, needed to move. But what? She couldn't fix the wheel herself, not in this storm, not with hands that could barely feel anything anymore. She couldn't stay here, couldn't just sit and wait for help that would never come. No one else would be foolish enough to be out in this. Then, through the screaming wind, she heard something else. A voice, deep and strong, cutting through the storm like a knife. "Miss, can you hear me?" Katherine's head snapped up, her heart suddenly pounding. She squinted into the whiteness, trying to see, trying to understand if she'd actually heard something or if her frozen brain was playing tricks on her. Then she saw him, a dark shape emerging from the blizzard like a ghost, leading a massive horse behind him. He was bundled in a heavy coat, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face, a bandana wrapped around the lower half to protect against the wind. "Your wheel!" he shouted, moving closer. "It's broken!" "I know!" Katherine tried to shout back, but her voice came out as barely more than a croak. Her throat was raw from breathing the icy air. The man didn't wait for more explanation. He moved to the back of her wagon, examining the damage with quick, efficient movements despite the storm raging around them. Katherine watched him, still not entirely convinced he was real. He was tall, she could see that much, with broad shoulders and a way of moving that spoke of strength and confidence. He wore chaps over his trousers and spurs on his boots. A cowboy then, though what a cowboy was doing, this far east in Virginia, was beyond her frozen mind to puzzle out. He came back to the front of the wagon, pulling his bandana down enough that she could see his face for a moment. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair plastered to his forehead by melting snow and ice-blue eyes that were startling in their intensity. Even half frozen as she was, something in her chest tightened at the sight of him. "I can fix it," he shouted over the wind, "but you need to get down. You'll freeze up there." Katherine tried to move, but her body wouldn't cooperate. Her legs felt like blocks of wood, her hands frozen claws still clutching the reins. She saw the cowboy's expression change, saw him realize she was in worse shape than he'd thought. Without hesitation, he climbed up beside her, his strong hands gently prying her fingers from the reins. "Come on," he said, his voice gentler now, though still loud enough to be heard over the storm. "I've got you." He lifted her down from the seat like she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest as he carried her to the leeward side of the wagon, where the wind wasn't quite as fierce. He set her down carefully, making sure she could stand before he let go. Even through the layers of clothing between them, Katherine could feel the warmth of him, the solid strength that seemed entirely unaffected by the cold that was killing her. "Can you stand?" he asked, his hands still steadying her. Katherine nodded, not trusting her voice. Her legs shook, but they held her weight. "Good. Stay here, stay out of the wind as much as you can. I'm going to fix that wheel." "You cannot," Katherine managed to say, her words slurred by her frozen lips. "Not in this storm." "Watch me," he said, and there was something in his voice, a determination that bordered on stubbornness, that made her believe him. He went to his horse, a magnificent bay gelding that stood calm despite the storm, and retrieved tools from his saddlebags. Then he went to work on her wagon wheel, and Katherine watched in amazement as he did exactly what he'd promised. He worked with swift efficiency, his movements sure, and practiced despite the wind trying to knock him off his feet, and the snow doing its best to bury him. He used a spare spoke from his own supplies, reinforcing it with leather strapping, his hands working with a skill that spoke of years of practice. Katherine tried to help, tried to be useful, but he waved her back every time she moved. "Stay there," he shouted. "One of us freezing is enough." She didn't know how long it took. Time seemed to have lost all meaning in the white void of the storm. Her feet had gone completely numb, and she was shaking so hard she had to brace herself against the wagon to stay upright. She watched him work, this stranger who'd appeared out of nowhere to save her life, and she found herself memorizing the way he moved, the set of his shoulders, the determined line of his jaw visible even through the bandana. Finally, he straightened, testing the wheel with his full weight. It held. He'd actually done it. He'd fixed her wagon in the middle of the worst blizzard Katherine had ever seen. He came back to her, and even in her half-frozen state, she could see the concern in his eyes as he looked at her. "You're in bad shape," he said bluntly. "We need to get you somewhere warm." "There is nowhere," Katherine said, and was horrified to hear her voice crack. She was tougher than this. She'd left Richmond on her own, determined to make a new life for herself in the Western Territories. She wouldn't break now, but the cold was so much worse than she'd imagined, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. "There's a line cabin about 2 miles north of here," the cowboy said. "I passed it on my way south. It will have a stove, maybe some supplies. Can you drive?" Katherine looked at her hands. She couldn't feel her fingers at all anymore. "I do not know," she admitted. "Then I'll drive your wagon," he said decisively. "You'll ride with me on Sterling. He's steady, and he'll follow your horse." "I cannot ask you to do that," Katherine protested, even as relief flooded through her. "You have already done so much." "You're not asking. I'm offering." He studied her face, and something softened in his expression. "What's your name, miss?" "Katherine," she said. "Katherine Keller." "Isaac Whitman," he said, and even through the howl of the wind, his voice carried a warmth that made her shiver for reasons that had nothing to do with the cold. "And I'm not leaving you out here, Miss Keller, so don't bother arguing." He helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to hold the reins. Katherine found herself pressed back against his chest, surrounded by his warmth and his strength, and for the first time since the storm had hit, she felt something other than terror. She felt safe. Isaac tied Sterling's reins to the back of her wagon, then climbed up to the driver's seat. He got Daisy moving, the wagon lurching as the repaired wheel took the weight. Katherine held her breath, but the wheel held, and they were moving, pushing forward through the storm. The 2 miles to the cabin felt like 200. The wind tried to drive them back with every step, the snow piling up so fast that the road disappeared entirely. But Isaac seemed to have an unerring sense of direction, guiding the wagon forward with a confidence that Katherine could only marvel at. She huddled in her cloak, her body shaking uncontrollably now, and tried to stay conscious. The cold was pulling at her, trying to drag her down into darkness, and she had to fight to keep her eyes open. "Stay with me, Katherine," Isaac's voice cut through the storm, and she realized he'd turned to check on her. "We're almost there. Don't you dare fall asleep." "I am trying," she said, but her words came out slurred and slow. "Try harder." His voice was sharp now, cutting, and it gave her something to focus on, something to push back against. She forced her eyes wider, forced herself to sit straighter, and she saw him nod in approval before he turned back to driving. When the cabin finally appeared through the white curtain of snow, Katherine almost wept with relief. It was small, just a single room built of rough logs, but it had 4 walls and a roof, and that was all that mattered. Isaac brought the wagon right up next to it, giving them the shortest possible distance to cover through the storm. Then he was there, lifting her down from the wagon seat again, half carrying her to the cabin door. The door was latched but not locked, and it swung open with a push. Inside, the cabin was dark and cold, but it was shelter from the wind, and that alone made it seem like paradise. Isaac set Katherine down on a rough wooden bench against one wall, then immediately went to work. He found a lamp and got it lit, filling the cabin with warm golden light. Then he turned his attention to the stove, a cast-iron beast in the corner that looked like it hadn't been used in months. Katherine watched through eyes that wanted to close as Isaac coaxed the stove to life, feeding it kindling, and then larger pieces of wood until flames were crackling merrily behind the iron door. The warmth that began to fill the cabin was like a physical thing, spreading out from the stove in waves. Katherine leaned toward it instinctively, her frozen body desperate for heat. "Not too fast," Isaac warned, coming to kneel in front of her. "Warm up gradually, or you'll make yourself sick." He pulled off his gloves and reached for her hands, taking them gently in his own. His hands were warm, so warm, and Katherine gasped at the sensation as feeling began to return to her fingers. It hurt, pins and needles that made her want to pull away, but Isaac held firm. "I know it hurts," he said quietly, his blue eyes fixed on hers. "But it's a good sign. Means there's no frostbite. Just stay with me." He rubbed her hands carefully, methodically, bringing circulation back. Then he moved to her feet, unlacing her boots with practiced efficiency and pulling them off along with her stockings. Katherine knew she should be embarrassed, should protest this intimacy with a stranger, but she was too cold and too grateful to care. Isaac rubbed her feet with the same careful attention he'd given her hands, and gradually, painfully, warmth began to return. Only when he was satisfied that she wasn't in immediate danger did Isaac turn his attention back to the storm. He went outside, and Katherine heard him moving around, heard the stamp of hooves and the creak of leather. He was seeing to the horses, she realized. Even after everything, even exhausted as he must be, he was making sure the animals were cared for. He came back inside after what felt like an eternity, his hat and shoulders thick with fresh snow. "Got them in the lean-to out back," he said, stomping snow off his boots. "It's not much, but it will keep the wind off them. Gave them grain from your supplies. Hope that's all right." "Of course," Katherine said, and was pleased to hear that her voice sounded steadier. The warmth from the stove was working its way through her, chasing away the deadly chill. "Thank you. For everything. I would have died out there without you." Isaac shrugged out of his heavy coat, hanging it on a peg by the door. Without it, she could see him properly for the first time. He was leaner than she'd expected, but the lean build of a working man, all muscle and no fat. His shirt was damp with melted snow, clinging to his shoulders and chest, and Katherine found her eyes tracing the lines of him before she caught herself and looked away. "You would have done the same for me," Isaac said, settling himself on the floor near the stove. "Would I?" Katherine asked softly. "I like to think so, but I do not know if I would have had the courage to stop, the skill to help." "Courage isn't about not being afraid," Isaac said, his eyes meeting hers across the small space. "It's about doing what needs doing anyway. You were headed northwest in March, by yourself, from the looks of it. That takes courage, Miss Keller." "Katherine," she said, "please, just Katherine. I think after you have saved my life, we can dispense with formalities." A slow smile spread across Isaac's face, transforming him. He'd been handsome before, in a rough, weathered way, but when he smiled, he was nearly beautiful. "Isaac, then. No Mr. required." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the storm rage outside and the fire crackle in the stove. Katherine was still shaking, but it was lessening as warmth seeped back into her bones. She studied Isaac when she thought he wasn't looking, taking in the details she'd missed before. He had a scar along his jaw, thin and white, and his hands bore the calluses of hard work. His dark hair was drying now, curling slightly at his temples. He couldn't be much older than she was, but there was something in his eyes that spoke of experience beyond his years. "Where were you headed?" Isaac asked, breaking the silence. "If you don't mind my asking." "West," Katherine said simply. "I was planning to go through the mountains to reach the railroad at Williamsburg first, then head further west from there. I have family in Colorado Territory, or I did. A cousin who wrote to say there were opportunities there for someone willing to work hard." "Long journey for a woman alone," Isaac observed, and there was no judgment in his voice, just curiosity. "The alternative was staying in Richmond," Katherine said, and couldn't quite keep the bitterness from her voice. "My father died last year, heart failure. He left debts, so many debts. The house was sold to pay them, and suddenly I found myself with nowhere to go and no prospects. I could have married, I suppose. There were offers. But I have never been good at doing what is expected of me." Isaac's smile returned, smaller this time, but no less warm. I can respect that. I left Texas 2 years ago for much the same reason. Everyone had expectations, plans for what I should do, who I should be. None of them were what I wanted. And what did you want? Katherine asked, genuinely curious. Freedom, Isaac said simply. A chance to make my own way, be my own man. I have been working ranches up and down the eastern territories, saving money, learning everything I can. Plan to have my own spread someday, maybe up in Montana or Wyoming. That is a dream worth chasing, Katherine said softly. Outside, the wind howled even louder, and snow rattled against the cabin's single window like thrown gravel. Isaac glanced toward the door, his expression turning serious. "We're going to be here for a while," he said. "This storm isn't letting up anytime soon. Might be tomorrow before we can move on safely." Katherine nodded, unsurprised. The storm had the feel of something that would last, something that had settled in for the duration. "I have supplies in the wagon," she offered. "Food, blankets. We will not starve at least." "I'll get them," Isaac said, rising to his feet. "You stay here by the fire. You're not warm through yet." He went back out into the storm, and Katherine found herself holding her breath until he returned, his arms full of her belongings. He made 3 trips, bringing in everything she might need, along with his own saddlebags. By the time he was done, the cabin felt almost cozy, their supplies stacked neatly against one wall. Katherine's traveling bags contained hardtack, dried beef, coffee, and a few precious tins of peaches that she'd been saving for special occasions. Isaac added his own supplies to the mix, and between them, they had enough for several days if necessary. He found a battered coffee pot in the cabin's meager stores and set it on top of the stove, filling it with snow from outside that quickly melted. The smell of coffee soon filled the cabin, rich and comforting. Isaac poured 2 cups, handing one to Katherine. She wrapped her hands around it, savoring the warmth, and took a sip. It was strong enough to strip paint, but it was hot and it was coffee, and it tasted like heaven. "You are very good at this," Katherine observed, watching as Isaac efficiently prepared a simple meal from their combined stores. "Taking care of things, I mean, making the best of a bad situation." Isaac shrugged, not looking up from his work. "You learn quick when you are working cattle in Texas. Weather can turn on you in a heartbeat out there. You get good at adapting or you don't survive long." "Is that where you got that scar?" Katherine asked, then immediately felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I am sorry. That was terribly forward of me." But Isaac just touched his jaw, his expression thoughtful. "This? No, I got this from my older brother when I was 15. We were fighting over something stupid. I do not even remember what. He threw a punch. I ducked wrong. Caught his ring on my face. Bled like you would not believe." He smiled slightly. "Mama was furious with both of us. Made us muck out the stables together for a month as punishment." "Do you miss them?" Katherine asked softly. "Your family?" Isaac was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. "Sometimes," he admitted finally. "But I miss the idea of them more than the reality, if that makes sense. We were never close, not really. Too many expectations, too much pressure to be something I was not. Out here, I can just be Isaac. No family name to live up to, no legacy to carry on, just me and what I can make of myself." Katherine understood that better than she could say. Her own family had been small, just her and her father, after her mother died when she was 10. But the weight of expectations had been there all the same. A proper young lady did not have opinions on politics. A proper young lady did not read philosophy or argue with her father's business partners. A proper young lady certainly did not strike out alone for the territories. "To being ourselves, then," Katherine said, raising her coffee cup in a toast. Isaac's eyes met hers, and something passed between them in that moment, a recognition, an understanding. "To being ourselves," he echoed, and clinked his battered tin cup against hers. They ate their simple meal in companionable silence, the storm continuing to rage outside. The cabin was warming nicely now, the stove throwing off steady heat, and Katherine felt herself beginning to relax for the first time in hours. The terror of the broken wheel, of being stranded in the blizzard, was fading, replaced by a strange contentment. She was warm, she was safe, and she was not alone. As the evening wore on, they talked. At first it was just small things, inconsequential details about their lives and journeys. But gradually, as the darkness deepened outside and the cabin became their entire world, The conversation went deeper. Isaac told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the endless sky and the freedom of the open range. He told her about leaving, about the look on his father's face when he'd announced he was going, about the long, lonely rides through unfamiliar country. Katherine, in turn, told him about Richmond, about her father's bookshop, and the smell of leather and ink that had filled her childhood. She told him about sitting behind the counter as a little girl, reading every book she could get her hands on, while her father worked. She told him about watching the shop fail slowly after her mother died, about her father's descent into gambling, trying to recoup his losses, about the terrible day when she had realized everything was gone. "He did not mean to hurt me," Katherine said softly, staring into the fire. "He was just trying to fix things, trying to make it better. But instead, he made it worse, and then he died and left me with nothing but debts and memories." Isaac reached out, and his hand covered hers where it rested on her knee. The touch was warm, comforting, and Katherine found herself turning her hand over, her fingers lacing through his without conscious thought. "You have more than that," Isaac said quietly. "You have courage and determination and the will to make a new life. That is worth more than money, Katherine. That is worth everything." She looked up at him, at this man who had appeared out of a blizzard to save her life, and felt something shift in her chest. His blue eyes were soft in the firelight, his expression open and honest, and Katherine realized with a start that she trusted him, completely and utterly trusted him, in a way she'd never trusted anyone before. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for stopping, for helping, for staying." "There is nowhere else I would rather be," Isaac said, and the way he said it, the warmth in his voice, made Katherine's breath catch. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Katherine could not quite name. Isaac's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand, and Katherine found herself leaning closer, drawn by something she did not entirely understand. The cabin, the storm, the whole world seemed to shrink down to just the two of them, and in that moment, Katherine felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Then Isaac pulled back, gently releasing her hand, and the spell broke. "You should sleep," he said, his voice rougher than before. "It has been a long day, and tomorrow will likely be longer. We will need to assess the damage to your wagon properly, make sure it can handle the rest of the journey." Katherine nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The terror and the cold had taken their toll, and now that she was warm and safe, her body was demanding rest. She retrieved one of her blankets, wrapping it around herself, and settled onto the bench that ran along one wall. Isaac banked the fire, making sure it would burn through the night without needing constant attention, then made himself a rough bed on the floor near the stove. "Sleep well, Katherine," he said softly. "You too, Isaac," she replied, and closed her eyes. But sleep was slow to come. Katherine lay in the darkness, listening to the storm and the crackle of the fire, and thought about the man sleeping on the floor just a few feet away. She'd known him for less than a day, but somehow it felt like she'd known him forever. There was a rightness to his presence, a sense of safety and belonging that Katherine had never felt with anyone else. She was still thinking about it when she finally drifted off to sleep, warm and safe with the storm raging outside and Isaac Whitman watching over her in the night. Morning came gray and sullen, the storm still blowing hard enough to rattle the cabin's door in its frame. Katherine woke to the smell of coffee and found Isaac already up, tending the stove and preparing breakfast. He smiled when he saw she was awake, and Katherine felt her heart do a strange little skip in her chest. "Morning," he said. "Storm's still going strong. We are not going anywhere today." Katherine sat up, pushing her hair back from her face. She must look a mess, she thought, but Isaac was looking at her like she was something precious, and it made her feel beautiful despite everything. "Then we make the best of it," she said, returning his smile. And they did. The second day in the cabin passed with surprising swiftness. They talked more, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Isaac taught her how to make decent coffee over a wood stove, and Katherine shared the precious tins of peaches, and they both pretended that the small, rough cabin was a palace and they were exactly where they wanted to be. In the afternoon, when the storm seemed to ease slightly, Isaac went out to check on the horses and inspect Katherine's wagon more thoroughly. He came back covered in snow, but satisfied. "The wheel will hold," he reported, brushing snow from his shoulders. "My repair job is rougher than I would like, but it should get you to Williamsburg at least. From there, you can have a proper wheelwright look at it. Williamsburg, Katherine said softly. I had almost forgotten that was where I was headed. Isaac looked at her sharply, something flickering in his eyes. You still want to go west, to Colorado? Did she? Katherine thought about her cousin in Colorado, a woman she barely remembered from childhood visits. Thought about the vague promise of work and opportunity in a place she'd never seen. Then she looked at Isaac, at the man who'd saved her life and shared his stories and made her laugh despite everything. And she realized that Colorado had never been about the destination. It had been about escape, about running from a life that had crumbled around her. But here, in this cabin with this man, she was not running. She was exactly where she wanted to be. I do not know, she admitted quietly. A day ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. Now, I am not so certain. Isaac crossed the small space between them in 2 strides, kneeling in front of her bench so they were eye to eye. Katherine, he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. I know we have only known each other for a day. I know this is fast, probably too fast, and maybe I am crazy for even thinking it, but I cannot let you go without saying this. Katherine's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Saying what? That I have never met anyone like you, Isaac said, his voice low and intense. That in one day you have become more important to me than anyone I have known my whole life. That the thought of you riding away, of never seeing you again, is unbearable. Isaac, Katherine whispered, her hands coming up to cup his face. His skin was warm beneath her palms, his stubble rough against her fingers. I feel it too, this impossible, illogical thing between us. I do not understand it, but I feel it. Then do not go to Colorado, Isaac said, his hands covering hers. Come with me instead. We will go west together, find a place to build something real. I do not have much, but what I have is yours, my protection, my strength, my heart. All of it, Katherine. All of it is yours if you want it. Katherine felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, joyful tears. Here was this man, this wonderful, impossible man, offering her everything she'd ever wanted and things she had not even known to dream of. A partnership, an adventure, a future built together. Yes, she said, and saw his eyes widen in disbelief and hope. Yes, Isaac, yes to all of it. He kissed her then, his lips finding hers with a gentleness that made her tremble. Katherine kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into it, all her hope and fear and joy. Isaac's arms came around her, pulling her close, and Katherine melted into him, into this perfect moment that felt like the beginning of everything. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. I promise you, he said softly, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of this gift, of you. You already are, Katherine said, and kissed him again. The storm finally broke during the night, the wind dying away to nothing and the snow stopping as suddenly as it had started. Morning dawned clear and cold, the world transformed into a winter wonderland of pristine white. Katherine stood in the doorway of the cabin, Isaac's arm around her waist, and marveled at the beauty of it. Ready to face the world? Isaac asked, his breath making clouds in the frigid air. As long as you are with me, Katherine replied, leaning into his warmth. They prepared to leave with practiced efficiency, packing up their supplies and harnessing Daisy to the wagon. Isaac's repair job on the wheel looked even rougher in the morning light, leather strapping and prayer holding it together. But when Katherine expressed concern, Isaac just grinned. It will hold, he said confidently. Trust me. And she did. With her whole heart, she did. They set out together, Isaac riding Sterling beside Katherine's wagon. The road was buried under feet of snow, but the storm had packed it down enough that the wagon could manage. They moved slowly, carefully, Isaac keeping a watchful eye on the repaired wheel. Every creak and groan made Katherine hold her breath, but the wheel held, just as Isaac had promised. The journey to Williamsburg took 3 days instead of the one it should have taken, the storm having slowed everything down. But Katherine found she did not mind. Every night, they stopped and made camp, and Isaac would help her down from the wagon and hold her close, and they would talk and laugh and plan their future together. Every morning, she woke to find him already up, tending the fire and watching over her with those blue eyes that made her heart race. On the 3rd day, the town of Williamsburg appeared on the horizon, its church steeple rising above the bare trees. Katherine felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief that they'd made it safely. Disappointment that this particular part of their journey was ending. But Isaac seemed to sense her mood. He rode closer to the wagon, close enough that she could have reached out and touched him if she wanted. "This is not an ending," he said softly. "This is just the next beginning." Williamsburg was a bustling town, larger than Katherine had expected, with wide streets and solid buildings that spoke of prosperity. They found a wheelwright easily enough, a gruff man named Henderson, who looked at Isaac's repair work and shook his head in amazement. "Should not have held," he muttered, examining the wheel closely. "But damn if it did not. You've got a talent, young man." Isaac just shrugged, but Katherine saw the pride in his eyes. "Had good motivation to make it work," he said, glancing at her. Henderson replaced the broken spoke and reinforced the wheel properly, and by evening, the wagon was as good as new. Katherine paid him from her carefully hoarded funds, wincing at the dent it put in her resources, but grateful to have a wagon that would not fall apart under her. They found a boarding house that would take them for the night. Separate rooms because propriety still mattered even out here, but Katherine found herself lying awake, staring at the ceiling and wishing Isaac was there beside her. She'd grown so used to his presence in just a few days, the sound of his breathing, the warmth of him nearby. The bed felt too large and too empty without him. In the morning, over breakfast in the boarding house's dining room, they made plans. Real plans, not just dreams shared in the darkness, but concrete decisions about their future. "We will need supplies," Isaac said, making a list on a scrap of paper. "Food enough for at least 3 weeks, maybe 4. Ammunition, blankets, tools. If we are going to head west properly, we need to be prepared." "I have some money," Katherine offered. "Not much, but enough to help." "We pool our resources," Isaac said firmly. "What's mine is yours. What's yours is mine. We are in this together, Katherine." The words sent a warm glow through her. Together. They were in this together. They spent the day gathering supplies, transforming Katherine's wagon from a simple traveler's conveyance into a proper frontier outfit. Isaac knew exactly what they would need, his Texas experience serving them well. He bought rifles and ammunition, explaining that they would need to hunt for food on the trail, and that there were sometimes dangers, both animal and human, that required being able to defend themselves. Katherine balked at the rifles at first. She'd never fired a gun in her life, and had no desire to start. But Isaac was patient, explaining that it was not about wanting to use them, but about having the option if necessary. Eventually she agreed, trusting his judgment. In a general store, Katherine found a beautiful bolt of cloth, deep blue like a summer sky, and could not resist buying it despite the impracticality. Isaac raised an eyebrow when he saw her purchase, but said nothing, just smiled in that gentle way of his that made her feel seen and understood. "For our home," Katherine explained, feeling her cheeks heat. "Wherever that ends up being, for curtains or a tablecloth or something domestic and impractical." "I love it," Isaac said simply, and kissed her right there in the middle of the street, not caring who saw. That evening, they sat in the boarding house parlor, maps spread out before them. Other travelers and boarders moved around them, but Katherine barely noticed. Her whole world had narrowed to Isaac and the future they were planning together. "Wyoming," Isaac said, his finger tracing a route on the map. "Or Montana. Both have good ranch land, space to spread out. We could file a homestead claim, build something from the ground up." "How long will it take us to get there?" Katherine asked, studying the map. The distances were staggering, hundreds of miles of unknown territory. "Depends on the weather, the roads, how lucky we get," Isaac said. "Could be 2 months, could be 4. It is a hard journey, Katherine. I will not lie to you about that. There will be rivers to cross, mountains to climb, stretches where we will not see another soul for days. But we will be together," Katherine said, and saw his expression soften. "Always," he promised. "Through everything, we will be together." The word marriage had not been spoken yet, but it hung in the air between them, understood if not yet formalized. They were too practical, both of them, to pretend this was anything other than what it was. They were building a life together, a partnership that would last until death parted them. The legal and religious formalities could come later, when they found a town big enough to have a proper preacher. 2 days later, they left Williamsburg heading west. The wagon was packed to bursting, Sterling tied to the back beside Daisy. Isaac drove, Katherine sitting beside him on the bench. And for the first time since her father died, Katherine felt like she was not just running away from something, but running towards something better. The journey west was everything Isaac had warned it would be and more. They traveled through Virginia and into Kentucky, following trails that were sometimes barely more than suggestions. The roads were rough, rutted, and muddy from winter snowmelt, and there were days when they covered less than 10 miles, despite traveling from dawn to dusk. But there were good days too, days when the sun shone warm on their faces and the road stretched smooth before them. Days when they stopped for lunch beside clear streams and Isaac would catch fish with his bare hands, making Katherine laugh at his antics. Days when they would see deer or elk in the distance, and once, memorably, a black bear that watched them pass with curious dignity before ambling back into the forest. Isaac taught Katherine how to handle the rifle, taking her out away from the road and setting up targets. She was terrible at first, unable to hit anything, flinching from the recoil. But Isaac was endlessly patient, adjusting her stance, showing her how to breathe and sight properly. Eventually, she managed to hit the target more often than not, and the pride in Isaac's eyes made every aching shoulder worthwhile. In turn, Katherine taught Isaac to read better. He could manage the basics, enough to get by, but he struggled with anything more complex. So in the evenings, by firelight, Katherine would read to him from the books she'd brought from Richmond. Poetry, philosophy, even a battered copy of Shakespeare that had been her father's. Isaac would listen, his eyes distant, absorbing the words like a man dying of thirst, finally finding water. "I never had much schooling," he admitted one night, his head resting in Katherine's lap as she read. "We were too busy working the ranch, and Pa did not see the point anyway. Said all a man needed to know, he could learn from cattle and horses." "Your father was wrong," Katherine said gently, her fingers combing through Isaac's dark hair. "There is a whole world in books, Isaac. Places we will never see, people we will never meet, ideas that can change how you see everything." "Read to me some more," Isaac said softly. "I like your voice." So she did, reading until the fire burned low and the stars wheeled overhead, and Isaac's breathing evened out into sleep. Only then did Katherine close the book and allow herself to just look at him, this man who'd become her whole world in a matter of weeks. He looked younger in sleep, the hard lines of his face softening, and Katherine felt such a surge of love for him that it almost hurt. They crossed into Tennessee, following the Cumberland Gap into the mountains. The passage was treacherous, the wagon struggling on steep grades, and there were times when Katherine was certain they would tip over or slide backward, but Isaac handled the horses with masterful skill, and they made it through without incident. In a small mountain town whose name Katherine never learned, they found a circuit preacher making his rounds. He was an old man with kind eyes and a gentle manner, and when Isaac approached him about marrying them, he agreed immediately. "Life's too short to waste time," the preacher said, smiling at the way Isaac could not stop looking at Katherine. "When you know, you know." They were married in a tiny church that was really just someone's cabin, with a cross nailed over the door. Katherine wore her best dress, the blue one she'd carefully preserved for special occasions, and Isaac had shaved and slicked his hair back with water until it lay almost flat. There were no guests except for the preacher's wife and a curious child who peeked in from outside. No flowers, no music, no fancy trappings. But when Isaac took Katherine's hands in his and promised to love and honor and cherish her for all the days of his life, his voice shaking with emotion, Katherine knew that no grand cathedral ceremony could have been more perfect. And when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Isaac kissed her, gentle and reverent and full of promise, Katherine felt like the luckiest woman alive. They spent their wedding night in the wagon, parked under an ancient oak tree just outside the town. Isaac had spread their blankets carefully, making a soft nest, and he'd brought wildflowers he'd picked along the trail. It was hardly a grand hotel, but to Katherine, it was perfect. Isaac was gentle with her, patient and loving, and if there was awkwardness in their joining, it was overshadowed by the tenderness between them. Afterward, they lay wrapped in each other's arms, Katherine's head on Isaac's chest, listening to his heartbeat, and talked about the future in soft whispers. "I am going to build you a house," Isaac said, his fingers tracing idle patterns on Katherine's shoulder. "A real house with glass windows and a proper floor. It will have a kitchen big enough to cook in and a bedroom with a real bed, and maybe, if we do well, even a separate room for a library where you can keep all your books." It sounds like a palace, Katherine said, smiling against his skin. You deserve a palace, Isaac said seriously. You deserve everything, Katherine. I know I cannot give you what you might have had in Richmond, the fancy things and the easy life, but I swear I will give you everything I have. Katherine pushed herself up on one elbow, looking down at her husband in the moonlight. Isaac Whitman, she said firmly, I do not want the life I might have had in Richmond. I do not want fancy things or an easy life. I want this. I want you and whatever life we build together. That is more than enough. That is everything. She kissed him to seal the words, and Isaac pulled her back down against him, holding her like she was precious beyond measure. They made love again, slower this time, learning each other with hands and lips and soft murmurs of encouragement. And afterward, they slept wrapped around each other as the stars wheeled overhead and the wagon creaked gently in the night breeze. The journey continued, through Tennessee and into Missouri, following the trails west. They joined up with a larger wagon train for a few weeks, traveling in the company of other families heading west. It was safer in numbers, and Katherine enjoyed the company of other women after so long with just Isaac. But the wagon train moved too slowly for Isaac's liking, stopping frequently and taking long breaks. After 3 weeks, he suggested they strike out on their own again, and Katherine agreed. She'd enjoyed the company, but she'd also enjoyed the solitude of their journey, just the two of them, against the world. Summer came on strong as they traveled, the sun beating down from a cloudless sky. The terrain changed from green mountains to rolling grassland, stretches of prairie that seemed to go on forever. Katherine had never seen so much space, so much open sky. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. They crossed the Missouri River on a ferry run by a gruff man who charged them nearly every cent they had left. The crossing was nerve-wracking, the wagon swaying on the rough wooden platform while the river rushed past below. But they made it across safely, and Isaac celebrated by splurging on supplies in the small town on the western bank. We are in real frontier territory now, he said, his eyes bright with excitement. A few more weeks and we will be in Wyoming. Wyoming. The word had taken on an almost mythical quality in Katherine's mind. The promised land, the place where they would finally stop running and start building. She could hardly wait, but the trail had other plans. In late July, as they crossed through Nebraska territory, disaster struck again. Not a blizzard this time, but a summer storm, one of those fierce prairie thunderstorms that came out of nowhere and hit like a hammer. They'd been making good time across a flat stretch when the sky suddenly turned green and the wind picked up. Isaac took one look and started urging the horses faster. We need to find shelter, he shouted over the rising wind. Now! But there was nowhere to go. The prairie stretched empty in all directions, not a tree or building in sight. The storm overtook them with shocking speed, wind and rain and hail hitting them like a physical blow. Katherine clung to the wagon seat, terrified, as Isaac fought to control the panicking horses. Lightning struck close enough that Katherine felt the hair on her arms stand up, the thunder simultaneous and deafening. Daisy reared, screaming in fear, and the wagon lurched violently. Katherine felt herself sliding, grabbed for something to hold on to, missed. She was falling, tumbling from the wagon seat, and then the world went black. She woke to Isaac's voice, desperate and scared, calling her name. Her head throbbed viciously, and when she tried to move, pain lanced through her left arm. She was lying in mud, rain still falling, and Isaac was there, his hands frantically checking her for injuries. Katherine! Oh God, Katherine, please be all right. Please, I cannot lose you, please. I am all right, Katherine managed to say, though her voice came out weak and thready. My arm hurts. Isaac's examination was gentle but thorough. Her left arm was broken, he determined, a clean break below the elbow. He splinted it with strips torn from his shirt and pieces of wood from their supplies, his hands shaking but sure. All the while, the storm continued to rage around them. We need to get you out of this rain, Isaac said, and there was a wild edge to his voice that Katherine had never heard before. He was scared, she realized. Truly, deeply scared. Can you stand? With his help, Katherine managed to get to her feet. Her head swam and her arms screamed in protest, but she stayed upright. Isaac helped her into the back of the wagon, which had somehow stayed upright through everything. He wrapped her in blankets, then climbed up beside her, holding her carefully against his chest. I am so sorry, he whispered into her hair. I should have seen the storm coming sooner. should have found shelter, should have protected you better. Isaac, no, Katherine said, turning her face up to his despite the pain it caused. This was not your fault. It was just bad luck, just weather. I am alive, and that is what matters. We are both alive. But Isaac's face was etched with guilt and fear, and Katherine knew that he was seeing all the ways he could have lost her, all the terrible possibilities. She reached up with her good hand, cupping his cheek, making him look at her. I am all right, she said firmly. I am here, and I am all right, and I love you. Do you hear me, Isaac Whitman? I love you. It was the first time she'd said the words out loud, though they'd been in her heart for weeks. Isaac's eyes widened, then filled with tears. I love you too, he said, his voice breaking. So much it terrifies me. When I saw you fall, when I thought I might have lost you, I could not breathe. Katherine, you are my whole world. I do not know how it happened so fast, but you are everything to me. She kissed him, tasting salt from his tears, or hers, or the rain, she could not tell. Then let us take care of each other, she said softly, through storms and broken bones and whatever else comes. Together. Together? Isaac echoed, and held her close as the storm finally began to ease. The broken arm slowed them down considerably. Katherine could not drive the wagon one-handed, which meant Isaac had to do all the work. He never complained, but Katherine could see the exhaustion setting in, the strain of handling everything alone. She helped where she could, awkwardly preparing meals and managing supplies with her one good hand. But it was frustrating beyond measure. They stopped in a tiny settlement, barely more than a trading post and a few scattered homesteads, so a doctor could look at Katherine's arm. He was a young man, newly trained back east, and full of enthusiasm for frontier medicine. He approved of Isaac's splinting, reset the bones slightly to ensure proper healing, and gave them laudanum for the pain. Keep it immobilized for at least 6 weeks, he instructed. Maybe 8, and no heavy work, Mrs. Whitman. Your husband here needs to make sure you rest. Isaac took the doctor's orders very seriously, fussing over Katherine until she wanted to scream. He would not let her lift anything, would barely let her walk on her own. It was sweet and infuriating in equal measure. Isaac, I am not made of glass, Katherine protested one evening as he tried to insist on feeding her supper because her arm was tired from being in the sling all day. I know that, Isaac said, his jaw set stubbornly. But you are hurt, and it is my job to take care of you. So let me. Katherine softened at the plea in his voice. You are taking care of me, she said gently. You have been taking care of me since the moment we met. But, Isaac, I need to do some things myself. I need to feel useful. They compromised. Katherine was allowed to help with cooking and light camp tasks, but nothing that strained her arm. Isaac handled everything else, from driving the wagon to setting up and breaking down camp to hunting for fresh meat. He pushed himself hard, too hard, and Katherine worried about him, even as she appreciated his devotion. In early August, they finally crossed into Wyoming territory. The land here was different from anything Katherine had seen before, vast and wild and beautiful in a harsh way. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still white with snow even in summer. The sky seemed bigger here, bluer, and at night, the stars were so bright and numerous that Katherine felt like she could reach up and touch them. Isaac was different here too, more relaxed, more himself. This was the kind of country he'd dreamed of. Open range perfect for cattle, land still unclaimed and full of possibility. He would point out features of the landscape, explaining how water ran and where good grass grew, and Katherine could hear the future in his voice. They found the place almost by accident. They had been following a river north, looking for a good place to cross, when they came around a bend and saw it, a valley, green and lush, protected on 3 sides by low hills. A creek ran through the center, feeding into the river, and there were stands of cottonwood trees that would provide timber for building. Isaac stopped the wagon, staring at the valley with an expression Katherine had never seen before. It was longing and hope and certainty all mixed together. This is it, he said softly. This is the place. Katherine looked at the valley, trying to see it through Isaac's eyes. She saw the potential there, the space for a house and barns, the grass for cattle, the water that would sustain them. But more than that, she saw home. She saw the future they'd been traveling toward since the day Isaac had fixed her wagon in a blizzard. Yes, she said, her hand finding his. This is it. They filed a homestead claim in the nearest town, a rough collection of buildings that called itself Elkhorn. The land office was run by a bored clerk who barely looked at them before processing the paperwork. 160 acres, theirs if they could improve it and live on it for 5 years. 5 years, Isaac said as they left the land office, the claim papers carefully folded in his pocket. We can do that, right? We can do anything, Katherine said confidently and meant it. Building the homestead was the hardest work Katherine had ever done, even with her broken arm mostly healed by the time they started. They lived in the wagon while Isaac built a small cabin, working from dawn until dark every day. Katherine helped where she could, holding boards steady while he nailed, mixing mortar for the chimney, preparing meals and managing the camp. The cabin was rough, just one room with a loft for sleeping, but it had 4 solid walls and a roof that did not leak and a chimney that drew properly. Isaac had cut windows, real glass windows bought dearly in Elkhorn, and Katherine hung her blue cloth as curtains. She'd embroidered it during the long evenings of travel, teaching herself needlework from memory of watching her mother as a child. The flowers she'd stitched were clumsy and uneven, but Isaac declared them the most beautiful things he'd ever seen. They moved into the cabin in late September, just as the first hints of autumn were touching the cottonwood trees. Isaac carried Katherine over the threshold, laughing at her protests that they were already married and had been living together for months. "Let me have this," he said, kissing her nose. "Let me do this one traditional thing properly." So Katherine let him, and when he set her down in the center of their new home, their first real home, she looked around at the rough wooden walls and the dirt floor and the crude furniture Isaac had built and thought it was the most beautiful place in the world. They worked through autumn to prepare for winter, and Katherine found herself remembering that terrible blizzard where she and Isaac had met with a strange sort of fondness. That storm had brought them together. It had been the beginning of everything. Isaac built a barn for the horses and the few chickens they had bought in Elkhorn. He cut firewood until they had a pile tall enough to last through even the worst winter. Katherine preserved what food she could, canning vegetables they had bought and meat that Isaac hunted. They worked together in perfect harmony, each knowing what needed to be done and doing it without being asked. In November, the first snow fell, and Katherine stood at the window of their cabin, watching the flakes drift down, and felt only peace. Isaac came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. Katherine turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd become her entire world. His face was weathered now, tanned from months in the sun and wind, and there were new lines around his eyes from squinting into distances. He looked older, more settled, and Katherine thought he'd never been more handsome. "I am happier than I ever imagined possible," she said honestly. "This life, this place, you, it is everything I did not know I wanted." Isaac's arms tightened around her. "I thank God for that blizzard every day," he said, "for that broken wheel that brought you into my life. I know that sounds terrible, that you could have died, but Katherine, without that storm, I would never have met you. I would never have known what it was like to truly love someone." "Then I thank God for it too," Katherine said, and kissed him there in the golden light from their fire, in the home they'd built together, as snow fell softly outside, and the wind sang a gentler song than that terrible night where their story had begun. Winter came on hard and fierce, but they were prepared. The cabin stayed warm, the stove Isaac had installed throwing off steady heat. They had food enough and firewood aplenty, and more importantly, they had each other. The long winter nights were spent reading by firelight, Katherine's books earning their keep, or talking, or simply sitting in comfortable silence, content in each other's presence. In the deepest part of winter, when snow piled so high against the cabin walls that they could barely open the door, Katherine realized she was with child. She said nothing at first, wanting to be certain, but when 2 months passed and her suspicions became certainty, she told Isaac one evening after supper. He'd been cleaning his rifle, methodical and thorough, but at her words, he nearly dropped it. "A baby?" he said, his voice strange and high. "We are going to have a baby?" "Yes," Katherine said, suddenly nervous. They'd never discussed children, had been too focused on survival and building their homestead. What if he was not ready? What if he did not want this? But then Isaac's face broke into the biggest smile Katherine had ever seen, and he crossed the cabin in 2 strides, sweeping her up in his arms and spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "A baby!" he shouted, heedless of who might hear, though they were miles from any neighbor. "Catherine, we are going to have a baby." He set her down carefully, as if she were made of spun sugar, and his hands came to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "When?" he asked, his voice reverent. "Late summer, I think," Catherine said, covering his hands with hers. "August, maybe early September." Isaac dropped to his knees, pressing his ear to her stomach, as if he could hear the baby already. "Hey there, little one," he said softly. "I am your papa. I cannot wait to meet you." Catherine's eyes filled with tears at the tenderness in his voice, at the wonder on his face. Whatever fears she'd had vanished in that moment. Isaac would be a wonderful father. They would figure this out together, just like they'd figured out everything else. Spring came, and with it, new life bursting forth everywhere. The valley greened up beautifully, wildflowers carpeting the hills in brilliant colors. Isaac plowed a field and planted vegetables, a proper garden that would feed them through the next winter. He also rode to Elkhorn and returned with news that made Catherine's heart skip. "There is a circuit preacher coming through next month," he said, his eyes bright. "And there will be a gathering, all the homesteaders from miles around, dancing, food, a chance to meet our neighbors properly." Catherine had met a few of the other homesteaders during trips to Elkhorn, but always briefly in passing. The thought of a real social gathering, of music and laughter and female company, was almost too good to believe. The day of the gathering, Catherine dressed in her blue dress, altered now to accommodate her growing belly. She was 5 months along, visibly pregnant, and she'd worried that she would be judged by the other women. But when they arrived at the designated meeting place, a wide meadow by the river where several families had already gathered, she was welcomed with warmth and genuine pleasure. The women flocked around her, admiring her dress and asking about the baby and sharing their own pregnancy stories. Catherine found herself laughing more than she had in months, trading recipes and sewing patterns and all the small domestic details that made up a life. The men, meanwhile, gathered to discuss cattle and horses and the best grazing lands, and Catherine saw Isaac deep in conversation with several other homesteaders, gesturing expansively as he spoke. There was dancing as the sun set, fiddle music filling the warm summer air. Isaac swept Catherine into a slow waltz, mindful of her condition, and they swayed together under the stars. "I love you," Isaac said, the words almost lost in the music. "I love you so much, Catherine Whitman." "I love you too," Catherine replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "With everything I am, Isaac. I love you." The baby came in late August, on a day so hot that Catherine felt like she was melting. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Catherine was certain she would not survive it. But Isaac was there through all of it, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement, even when she screamed at him to leave her alone. The midwife, a tough frontier woman named Clara, who'd ridden 20 miles to attend the birth, finally placed a squalling baby in Catherine's arms as dawn broke over the mountains. "A boy," Clara announced. "Healthy and strong. You did good, Catherine." Catherine looked down at her son, at his tiny, perfect face and his shock of dark hair so like his father's, and felt her heart expand in a way she'd never imagined possible. This was her child, hers and Isaac's, the living embodiment of the love between them. "Do you want to hold him?" Catherine asked Isaac, who'd been standing frozen at the foot of the bed, staring at the baby with an expression of absolute wonder. Isaac approached carefully, as if the baby might break, and Catherine helped him take the infant, showing him how to support the head. Isaac held his son with such tenderness, such aching care, that Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes. "He is perfect," Isaac whispered, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. "Catherine, he is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Catherine asked softly. They'd discussed names through the pregnancy, throwing out possibilities and rejecting them. But now, looking at her husband holding their son in the golden morning light, Catherine knew exactly what his name should be. "James," she said, "after my father, James Whitman." Isaac looked up, surprise and emotion flickering across his face. Catherine had not spoken much about her father, the pain of his loss and the circumstances of it still raw. But she wanted to honor him, wanted her son to carry forward something good from her past. "James," Isaac repeated, testing the name. "Yes, James Whitman, it is perfect." The baby, as if in agreement, yawned widely and snuggled into his father's arms, already falling asleep. Isaac held him for a long time, just watching him sleep, while Katherine dozed fitfully and Clara tidied up around them. Finally, Clara approached and gently took the baby from Isaac. "Let his mama rest properly now," she said kindly. "And you should rest too, young man. You look about ready to fall over." Isaac did look exhausted, Katherine realized, dark circles under his eyes and his face drawn. He'd been awake for over 30 hours, supporting her through the labor. But he just smiled and moved to Katherine's side, sitting in the chair beside the bed and taking her hand. "I will rest when I know you are both all right," he said stubbornly. Katherine squeezed his hand weakly. "We are fine," she assured him. "Better than fine. We are a family now, Isaac." "A family," Isaac repeated, and the smile that spread across his face was pure joy. The first months with James were exhausting in ways Katherine had never imagined. The baby needed constant care, feeding and changing and soothing at all hours. Katherine felt like she never slept, like she existed in a haze of exhaustion punctuated by moments of fierce love when she looked at her son. But Isaac was there through all of it, sharing the burden. He would walk James when the baby cried at night, pacing the cabin floor and singing old Cowboy songs in his rough, off-key voice. He changed diapers without complaint and learned to soothe the baby's cries as skillfully as Katherine could. They were partners in this, just as they were partners in everything else. As James grew from an infant into a baby and then a toddler, the homestead grew too. Isaac bought cattle, building their herd slowly but steadily. The vegetable garden expanded, and Katherine learned to can and preserve, building up stores for the winters. They added a room onto the cabin, a proper bedroom so James could have the loft. And Isaac talked about building a separate barn, a bigger house, all the improvements they would make as their finances allowed. More homesteaders arrived in the valley, families drawn by the promise of land and opportunity. The nearest neighbors, a young couple named Martin and Sarah Collins, settled about 3 miles south. They had a daughter, Emma, who was 6 months younger than James, and Katherine and Sarah became fast friends. The isolation that had marked their first year eased, replaced by a sense of community. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and work and love. James grew into a bright, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, trying to help with the cattle and the horses. Isaac was endlessly patient with him, teaching him to ride and rope and all the skills a rancher's son needed to know. Katherine taught him to read, using the books she'd carried all the way from Richmond, and was delighted to discover he loved stories as much as she did. When James was 4, Katherine gave birth to twins, girls they named Hope and Grace. The pregnancy had been difficult, and the birth even more so, and Clara the midwife had warned afterward that Katherine should not have more children. The risk was too great. Katherine had cried when Clara told her, mourning the larger family she'd imagined. But Isaac had held her and reminded her of what they had, 3 healthy children and each other, and that was more than enough. The girls were as different as night and day from the start. Hope was bold and adventurous, always climbing things she should not and getting into mischief. Grace was quieter, more thoughtful, content to sit and watch the world go by. But they were inseparable, the bond between twins evident from their first moments. The homestead prospered. Isaac's cattle herd grew large enough that he hired help, young cowboys drifting through who worked a season or 2 before moving on. Katherine's garden became legendary in the small community that had grown up in the valley, her preserved vegetables and fruits sought after and traded eagerly. They were not rich by any means, but they were comfortable, secure in a way Katherine had never been in Richmond. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaac surprised Katherine by taking her to Elkhorn. He'd arranged for Sarah Collins to watch the children, and they spent a whole day in town, just the 2 of them. Isaac bought Katherine a dress, ready-made but pretty, in a green that matched her eyes. Katherine bought Isaac a fine leather belt with a silver buckle. They ate dinner at the town's only restaurant, a tiny place that served steak and potatoes, and not much else, but it felt like the finest meal Katherine had ever eaten. That night, in the hotel room Isaac had splurged on, they made love slowly, rediscovering each other without the constant interruptions of children and work. Afterward, Katherine lay in Isaac's arms, her fingers tracing the familiar scars on his chest and arms, the map of his body that she knew as well as her own. "Do you ever regret it?" Isaac asked softly. "Marrying me, I mean? Coming out here instead of going to Colorado, living this hard life? Katherine pushed herself up to look at him, shocked that he could even ask. "Isaac Whitman, I have never regretted a single moment," she said fiercely. "This life, hard as it sometimes is everything to me. You are everything to me. How could you even doubt that?" "Sometimes I look at you," Isaac said, reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, "and I wonder how I got so lucky. You could have had so much more, Katherine, a easier life, a softer life. Instead, you are stuck out here in the middle of nowhere, with a cowboy who barely knows his letters and 3 wild children." "I am not stuck," Katherine said, taking his face in her hands and making him look at her. "I am exactly where I choose to be. Do you remember what I said to you that first night in the cabin after the blizzard? That I did not want an easy life or fancy things? I meant it, Isaac. This life we have built, this family, this love between us. It is worth more than all the comfort in the world." Isaac pulled her down for a kiss, deep and thorough, and when they broke apart, he was smiling. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too," Katherine replied. "Always and forever, Isaac. Through blizzards and broken wheels and whatever else comes. Always and forever." The children grew. James became a skilled rider, able to help his father with the cattle from a young age. Hope and Grace grew like wildflowers, bright and beautiful and full of life. Katherine taught them all to read and write, and Isaac taught them the skills they would need to survive on the frontier. Together, they built a life that was full and rich and good. There were hard times, certainly. A drought year when the creek ran low and they had to haul water from the river. A winter so fierce that they lost half their herd to cold and starvation. A summer when Grace fell ill with fever and Katherine sat beside her bed for 3 days and nights, praying desperately for her daughter's recovery. The relief when the fever finally broke, leaving Grace weak but alive, had sent Katherine into Isaac's arms in tears. But the good times far outweighed the bad. Christmases spent around the fire, with gifts handmade and precious. Summer evenings when the whole family would go down to the creek to swim and play. Harvest times when their neighbors would gather to help each other bring in crops, and there would be music and dancing and laughter. The everyday moments of love and connection. 1,000 small kindnesses and joys that made up a life. When James turned 16, tall and strong, and so much like his father, it made Katherine's heart ache. Isaac gave him his own horse and his own stretch of range to manage. The pride in Isaac's eyes as he shook his son's hand, man to man, made Katherine's eyes fill with tears. Their boy was growing up, becoming his own person. And while it was bittersweet, it was also beautiful. Hope and Grace were 12 that same year. Young ladies who argued constantly, but loved each other fiercely. Hope wanted to learn ranching like her father and brother, while Grace was more interested in books and learning. Katherine saw herself in Grace, that hunger for knowledge and understanding, and made sure both girls had every opportunity to learn and grow. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Katherine and Isaac sat on the porch they had added to the house years ago, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Katherine's head rested on Isaac's shoulder, his arm around her waist, and they sat in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from years of knowing each other completely. "Do you remember that blizzard?" Katherine asked softly, though she knew he did. They'd told the story to their children countless times, how they met, how Isaac had fixed her wagon in the storm. "Every detail," Isaac confirmed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "The worst blizzard I ever saw, and the best thing that ever happened to me." "I was so scared," Katherine admitted. "I was certain I was going to die out there. And then you appeared like some kind of guardian angel, and everything changed." "I was scared too," Isaac said. "When I saw your wagon listing like that, I was terrified I would be too late. And then when I saw you, half frozen and barely able to move, I knew I could not let anything happen to you. I did not know you yet, did not know your name or anything about you, but somehow I knew you were important, that you were going to matter." Katherine turned to look at her husband, at the man he'd become. There was silver threading through his dark hair now, and lines etched deep around his eyes and mouth. His hands were calloused and scarred from decades of hard work, but his eyes, those startling blue eyes that had captured her attention that first day, were the same, full of love and strength and absolute certainty. "I love you," Katherine said, the words as true now as they'd been 20 years ago when she'd first spoken them. I have loved you from the moment you appeared out of that storm. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Isaac replied, pulling her closer. You are my heart, Katherine, my home. Everything good in my life comes from you. They sat together as the stars came out, one by one, filling the vast Wyoming sky with light. The homestead spread out below them, the barn and the corrals and the fields they'd carved from wild land with sweat and determination. In the house behind them, their children slept safe and warm. Everything they'd built, everything they'd become, had started with a broken wagon wheel in a blizzard and a cowboy who'd stopped to help. Would you do it all again? Katherine asked, though she knew the answer. If you could go back, knowing everything we would face, would you still stop for me that day? Isaac did not hesitate. Every single time, he said firmly. In every life, in every world, I would find you and I would love you. You are my once-in-a-lifetime, Katherine. My always. Katherine kissed him there under the stars, in the home they'd built with their own hands, surrounded by the life they'd created together. It had been a hard road, full of challenges and setbacks and moments of pure terror. But it had also been beautiful, full of love and laughter and joy beyond measure. And it had all started with a blizzard and a broken wheel, and a cowboy brave enough to ride into the storm. Isaac had fixed her wagon that day, but he'd done so much more than that. He'd fixed her broken life, given her a future when she'd thought she had none, loved her with a completeness that still took her breath away. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. James married at 22, bringing home a sweet girl named Anna from a neighboring ranch. And within a year, Katherine and Isaac became grandparents to a baby girl. Hope, true to her adventurous nature, became one of the few female ranchers in the territory, running her own small spread with fierce determination. Grace, surprising everyone, went east to attend a women's college, though she promised to return after graduation. The homestead that had started as one small cabin and a handful of cattle became a prosperous ranch. Isaac's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled cattleman spread, and the Whitman Ranch became known throughout the territory. But success never changed Isaac. He still worked as hard as any of his hired hands, still treated everyone with the same respect and kindness that had drawn Katherine to him from the start. As Katherine entered her 50s and then her 60s, she found herself marveling at the life she'd lived. She'd started with nothing, a young woman fleeing a failed past, with only a wagon and a horse and determination. Now she had everything, a family that spanned 3 generations, a home that was solid and prosperous, and most importantly, a love that had only deepened with time. She and Isaac grew old together, their bodies slowing, but their hearts still young. They still sat on the porch every evening, watching the sunset and holding hands. They still laughed together, still talked for hours about everything and nothing. The passion of their youth had mellowed into something deeper, a connection that transcended the physical. They were 2 halves of one whole, incomplete without the other. On a crisp autumn evening, when Katherine was 68 and Isaac 71, they sat together on their porch as they had 1,000 times before. The valley was ablaze with fall colors, the cottonwoods brilliant gold against the blue sky. Their great-grandchildren, 4 of them now, were playing in the yard, their laughter echoing across the ranch. "It has been a good life," Isaac said softly, his weathered hand covering Katherine's. "The best life," Katherine agreed, leaning her silver head against his shoulder. "Better than anything I could have imagined." "I still thank God for that blizzard," Isaac said, and Katherine heard the smile in his voice. "For that broken wheel that brought you into my life." "And I thank God for the cowboy who stopped to help," Katherine replied, "who fixed my wagon in the storm and then rode beside me all the way home." Isaac turned to kiss her, gentle and sweet, and Katherine kissed him back, pouring a lifetime of love into it. They were old now, their youth long behind them, but in that moment, Katherine felt young again. She felt like that frightened girl in the blizzard, seeing hope appear in the form of a dark-haired cowboy with startling blue eyes. The sun set in a blaze of glory, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The children's laughter continued, the sounds of family and life and love, and Katherine and Isaac sat together, hands clasped, hearts intertwined, grateful for every moment of the journey they had shared. It had all started with a storm and a broken wheel and a cowboy brave enough to help. But it had become so much more, a love story that had spanned decades, weathered countless challenges, and built something beautiful and lasting. A family, a home, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Katherine looked at her husband, her partner, her love, and smiled. They had ridden through life together, just as Isaac had ridden beside her wagon all those years ago, through storms and sunshine, through joy and sorrow, through everything that life had thrown at them. And they had made it home, together, always together.